In an incredibly surprising development, the world's political map is on fire. In a sneaky and unexpected turn of events, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has imposed limitations on its oil production, leading to a dramatic shift in power dynamics that grants Russia an extraordinary edge. As the whole world's energy situation shakes, come along with us on this thrilling and risky roller coaster journey, where friendships break apart and countries take big risks to come out on top. Get ready for a shocking revelation as Saudi Arabia, the powerful leader in oil, launches a destructive attack on its longtime friend, the United States. For a long time, a powerful security alliance has been really important in the energy market. It's made things stable and reliable. But lately, this alliance has started to become weaker, which is making people worry and unsure about what's going to happen. A significant moment in the history of this alliance was the meeting that took place in 1945 between President Franklin D. Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz ibn Saud aboard a U.S. cruiser in the Suez Canal. During that meeting, a groundbreaking deal was struck. The United States gained access to Saudi Arabia's vast oil reserves, while in return, they guaranteed the security and protection of the kingdom. This agreement was vital in the aftermath of an important event that occurred on April 2nd. It's important to note that Saudi officials have emphasized that their decision was driven primarily by their own national priorities rather than any specific diplomatic motives. The motivation behind the deal was to secure their own interest and ensure stability in the region. A significant player in the oil market, OPEC+, which includes OPEC countries and other oil-producing nations, has played a crucial role in stabilizing oil prices throughout history. Contrary to what some Western and industrial states claim, their actions are not politically driven. The organization focuses on market dynamics and supply-demand factors rather than political agendas. In the past, OPEC+ often found itself caught in a tricky situation. On one hand, they desire high oil prices because it meant more profits for them. However, they were also concerned that such prices would attract more competition, especially from the booming U.S. shale oil industry. This disagreement over price and competition sparked a fierce price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia in 2020. The two countries were vying for market share and were willing to lower prices to gain an advantage. It was a tense situation that had significant impacts on the global oil market. However, the dynamics have changed now, and the dilemma faced by OPEC+ has diminished. The rise in U.S. wages and inflation has caused the cost of shale oil production to increase, resulting in slower growth in output. As a result, oil companies are now focusing more on sharing profits with their shareholders rather than investing heavily in expanding production. In a fascinating turn of events, Russia, which is part of the OPEC+ group, has started selling diesel to Saudi Arabia, its friend. This happened because the European Union, which used to buy a lot of fuel from Russia, stopped doing so in April. They put an embargo on Russian oil products. So to deal with this, Russia quickly changed its plans and started sending its oil products to North Africa and Asia instead. At the same time, Europe began buying more diesel from the Middle East and Asia to make up for the oil it used to get from Russia. Before, Europe used to import about 600,000 barrels of Russian oil per day. It's interesting how these changes in trade are happening and how countries are finding new ways to get the fuel they need. Traders have revealed that in April, at least 3 shipments carrying 190,000 tons of diesel from the Russian Baltic port of Primorsk were intended for Saudi Arabia. Interestingly, Saudi Arabia might go on to export some of this Russian diesel to other countries after refining it. Previously, Europe used to purchase a large amount of diesel from the United States and Saudi Arabia before the European Union imposed an embargo. Despite the change in suppliers, Europe still remains the biggest purchaser of Russian diesel. However, the exports of oil products from Russia has recently experienced a decline. In February, it dropped by approximately 20%, reaching the lowest level since May of the previous year. This decrease is a direct response to the sanctions imposed by Western countries. As a result, Russia has made an announcement that it will reduce its oil production by 500,000 barrels per day this month. This reduction might have an impact on Russia's exports of oil and fuel. According to JP Morgan, Russian fuel exports could potentially decrease by 300,000 barrels per day due to the European Union's embargo. However, the bank believes that Russia will be able to maintain its production of crude oil at levels seen before the sanctions were imposed. Nonetheless, it may prove more challenging for Russia to reach the production levels observed prior to the pandemic. The combination of sanctions and the lingering effects of the pandemic presents certain obstacles for Russia's oil industry. Saudi Arabia and Russia share a special relationship when it comes to oil. Saudi Arabia has a unique advantage in that it can extract oil at a relatively low cost. That means that even when oil prices are around $50 to $55 per barrel, the kingdom can still make a profit. This is important for Saudi Arabia, as it allows the country to fund its imports and manage the outflow of money sent by its citizens living abroad, known as remittances. However, for Saudi Arabia to maintain a balanced budget and fulfill its social contract with its people, it needs oil prices to be higher. Ideally, the kingdom prefers oil prices to be around $75 to $80 per barrel. You see, Saudi Arabia has a social contract with its citizens. It promises them prosperity and well-being in exchange for their compliance with the government's political decisions. To fulfill this promise and ensure a prosperous future, the Saudi government needs to invest in non-oil industries that can provide job opportunities for its people. This requires significant financial resources, which primarily come from the revenue generated by exporting oil. In fact, Saudi Arabia's Sovereign Wealth Fund plans to invest a whopping $40 billion per year in the domestic economy. They have ambitious plans, including the construction of a futuristic city called Neom, which is set to be built in the desert. This megacity is estimated to cost a staggering $500 billion US. On the other hand, Russia depends heavily on money from selling oil to support its military activities. President Putin needs oil prices to be around $100 per barrel so that the country can balance its budget. The money Russia earns from selling oil is very important for paying for defense expenses and maintaining a strong military. Although the White House doesn't seem worried about the recent decrease in oil production, it's worth noting that the actual drop in output may not be as big as the numbers suggest. For example, Russia promised to reduce its oil production, but it only started to decrease the amount of oil it sells recently. However, most experts predict that in the next few years, the average price of oil will be between $85 and $90 per barrel. If OPEC Plus decides to implement further production cuts before the upcoming U.S. presidential elections, it could have implications for the outcome. It could potentially undermine President Biden's chances of winning the election. According to Bloomberg's economic scenario modeling tool, if supply cuts were to push oil prices to around $120 per barrel in 2024, it could lead to a higher inflation rate of nearly 4% compared to the baseline forecast of 2.7%. It is widely believed that high fuel prices can negatively impact incumbent politicians in elections. When oil prices rise to high levels, it often leads to problems for the oil industry itself. You see, when oil prices are high, it becomes very profitable for companies to invest in oil production. As a result, more and more oil is produced and added to the market. This happened before in the 1980s. After a period of booming oil production in the 1970s, there was an excessive amount of oil available, which caused what we call an oil glut. Places like Siberia, Alaska, the Gulf of Mexico, and the North Sea saw a significant increase in oil production during this time. A similar situation occurred in the 2000s. There was another oil boom, but it eventually came to an end in 2014. This time, the emergence of U.S. shale oil production played a role in bringing down the prices of oil. However, the current situation is even more urgent and complex. Countries around the world are facing environmental targets and concerns, which are pushing them to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels like oil. This means they're searching for alternative sources of energy and trying to decrease their consumption of oil. Moreover, there are national security worries in Europe. Europe used to heavily rely on oil and gas from Russia, but the war in Ukraine changed things. Now, Europe is motivated to diversify its energy sources and speed up the transition away from fossil fuels. In addition to the previous points, there is an additional concern regarding the unity among countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the rest of the OPEC Plus cartel. While they may come together and work in harmony when oil prices are high, benefiting all members, it becomes more challenging to maintain this unity when prices start to drop. As the cycle turns and prices decrease, member countries become less willing to limit their oil supply, as it affects their own economic interest. It is crucial to understand that the price of oil holds immense significance, as it is the most important commodity globally. However, there is a new factor contributing to the uncertainty and potential disruption in the global oil market. The United States can no longer rely on a particular country as a friend, which influences the price of oil. Saudi Arabia and Russia are well aware that the US and its major allies prefer to keep oil prices below $80 per barrel of Brent. If oil prices rise and remain high, it could have adverse effects on the US and its allies. One of the primary concerns is the impact on gas prices, which would increase, leading to higher inflation. Moreover, high oil prices could result in interest rates remaining elevated for a more extended period. This situation presents a risk for countries heavily dependent on oil imports, such as the United States. The sustained high prices of oil have specific effects on the U.S., both in terms of its economy and politics. When the price of crude oil changes by $10 per barrel, the average cost of a gallon of gasoline goes up by around 25 to 30 cents. This increase in gasoline prices directly affects consumers and their ability to spend money. For each cent that the price per gallon of gasoline goes up, over $1 billion per year in consumer spending is lost. This loss can have a negative impact on the overall U.S. economy. Historical data from the U.S. National Bureau of Economic Research reveals an interesting trend. Since World War I, whenever a sitting U.S. president ran for re-election and the country's economy was not in a recession within 2 years of the upcoming election, they won all 11 times. On the other hand, when sitting U.S. presidents sought re-election during a recession, they only won once out of 7 times. This data highlights the importance of avoiding a recession in the year leading up to the next U.S. election for President Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. Considering these economic and political factors, former President Donald Trump was firm in enforcing a price range for oil when Saudi Arabia, with the assistance of Russia, was attempting to drive oil prices above the $80 per barrel of Brent level in the second half of 2018. In a powerful speech at the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump delivered a clear message to Riyadh and other OPEC nations. He highlighted the United States' remarkable achievement of becoming the largest energy producer in the world, emphasizing their readiness to export abundant and affordable supplies of oil, clean coal, and natural gas. President Trump expressed his dissatisfaction with OPEC, accusing them of taking advantage of the rest of the world. He voiced his concern about high oil prices, stating that they're not favorable for anyone, and also emphasized the importance of OPEC nations contributing substantially to military protection, as the United States has been defending many of them without fair reciprocation. In addition, President Trump highlighted the potential dangers of relying too heavily on a single foreign supplier, explaining that such dependence can make a nation vulnerable to extortion and intimidation. He commended European states like Poland for leading the construction of the Baltic Pipeline, which aims to reduce their dependency on Russian energy. He cautioned that if Germany does not change course, it risks being completely dependent on Russian energy. In September 2018, the agreement between Saudi Arabia, Russia, and other OPEC countries to reduce oil production had a positive effect on oil prices, pushing them slightly above the limit set by Trump. In October 2018, during a rally in South Haven, Mississippi, Trump reiterated his warning, making it even clearer. To put it simply, during Trump's time as president, the price of oil that was associated with Trump was exceeded just once. This happened for about 3 weeks, starting in late September 2018 and lasting until the middle of October. The growing involvement of China in the Middle East has also become a concern for Washington. China has been providing assistance to both Iran and Saudi Arabia, leading to significant agreements that could potentially ease regional tensions. In one such agreement, Saudi Arabia struck a deal with China, agreeing to pay $3.6 billion for a share in the renowned Shang Petrochemical Company. This arrangement allows Saudi Arabia to provide the corporation with a substantial amount of crude oil. Due to the increasing rivalry between the United States, China, and Russia, experts believe that countries in the Middle East are exploring new alliances beyond their traditional partners. The long-standing special connection between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. has reportedly diminished. According to Saudi Arabian writer and pundit Ali Shahabi, instead of relying solely on the U.S., Saudi Arabia has developed closer relationships with various nations, including China, India, the UK, France, and others. This shift has allowed for a more open relationship and has led to diverse parties exerting varying degrees of influence. Shahabi suggests that it would be wise for Saudi Arabia to forge multiple strategic alliances, each contributing to the country's security and prosperity in a unique way. This perspective aligns with Princess Rima bin Bunder's statement in October, where she emphasized the importance of reassessing the U.S.-Saudi relationship. She acknowledged that the kingdom has undergone significant transformations in recent years, rendering previous analyses obsolete. However, she maintained that the U.S. and its allies still maintain a solid and broad-ranging alliance. A professor specializing in Middle Eastern studies and international relations at Johns Hopkins University argues that the U.S. needs to alter its attitude towards the Middle East. He believes that the current U.S. approach to Saudi Arabia is based on an outdated perception of the country. To effectively navigate the evolving landscape, the professor suggests a more nuanced understanding of the region and the forging of new strategies that align with the changing dynamics. However, there are other experts who believe that there won't be any rivalry between China, the US, and the Middle East. This is because China is primarily focused on expanding its economy and has little interest in regional politics. It is highly unlikely that Saudi Arabia and China will establish a close alliance, despite the fact that China buys a significant amount of crude oil from Saudi Arabia. China, despite its reliance on Saudi Arabia's oil exports, is unlikely to involve itself in any conflicts in the Middle East. China prefers to avoid forming alliances and getting entangled in regional wars. This is in contrast to Western nations, which often take a different approach when dealing with Saudi Arabia. China and Saudi Arabia emphasize respecting each other's domestic matters. When Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Riyadh last year, it was a display of the two nations' mutual understanding and the fact that they don't prioritize each other highly. As a result, they're less likely to interfere in each other's affairs. The Biden administration and Congress have criticized Saudi Arabia for its human rights record. However, this strategy actually benefits China, as it prevents Saudi Arabia from commenting on China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region. The U.S. has referred to this treatment as genocide in 2021. In addition, the Biden administration seemed to downplay China's contribution to the Saudi Arabian court. The White House spokesman, John Kirby, acknowledged Saudi Arabia's successful pressure and restrictions against potential strikes by Iran or its allies. This played a role in Iran's decision to negotiate. However, this doesn't necessarily indicate a change in U.S. policy toward the Middle East. It demonstrates a regional strategy to address an issue that regional actors believe the U.S. has been unable to resolve. As the world holds its breath, Saudi Arabia's strategic move shakes global economies. With oil sanctions targeting the U.S., Russia emerges as the unanticipated victor, seizing the opportunity to reshape the balance of power.